Cyberpunk 2077 gives us multiple endings. Some are hopeful, some are straight up brutal, and the rest feels like closure. But if you really look at them closely, almost none of them actually give V a definite ending. In some endings, V is still alive. In others, V's body is gone, but their consciousness may still exist. And even in the worst outcomes, Cyberpunk often avoids showing us absolute finality. So the question is simple. Did V really kick the bucket, or has Cyberpunk been leaving the door open for V's return in Orion all along? What's up everyone, and welcome to my channel. So for my first proper video, I wanted to start with one of the biggest questions in Cyberpunk right now. And I'm sure there's a lot of fans that thought about this as well. That is, could V return in Orion? Now, to be clear, this is a theory video. It's not confirmation, not leaks, and not me pretending I know exactly what CD Projekt Red is planning. But after replaying each ending again, one thing stood out to me. Cyberpunk 2077 is surprisingly careful about how it handles V's fate. Very rarely does the game give us a clean final answer. Instead, most endings leave behind uncertainty. And uncertainty is exactly where sequels find opportunity. So in this video, I want to break down each ending one by one and ask a simple question. Does this ending truly close the door on V, or does it leave just enough room for Orion to bring them back? So let's start with the ending that probably fuels the Orion discussion more than any other, and that is the sun. So in this ending, V becomes the legend of Night City. Their afterlife is theirs, their name carries weight, and despite everything they've been through, V's still alive. But the most important part of the sun isn't the status or the reputation, it's Mr. Blue Eyes. So Blue Eyes offers V one final job, an impossible heist involving the Crystal Palace. And the ending closes not with V dying or collapsing, but with V stepping into one last mission. Now maybe that matters, because the sun doesn't present V as a character whose story is over. It presents V as someone standing on the edge of another chapter. So V is still dying from the relic, but narratively speaking, the sun doesn't feel like a funeral, it feels like a setup. You've got Mr. Blue Eyes, who's probably one of the most mysterious figures in the entire game. You've got the Crystal Palace, which sounds less like an ending and more like the beginning of another plot line. And most importantly, you've got V alive, on screen, still moving forward. So if CD Projekt Red wanted to shut the door completely, this would have been the perfect place to do it. Instead, they do the opposite. They leave V in motion with unanswered questions, unfinished business, and a connection to one of Cyberpunk's biggest mysteries. If Orion ever wanted to bring V back as a central character, or even just revisit their story, the sun gives them a way to do it. So next up is the Star, which is probably the most hopeful ending in the base game. Instead of staying in Night City, V leaves with Panam and the Elder Callers, choosing family over legend and freedom over the city. So on paper, V's still in the same situation here. The damage from the relic is still real, but the clock is still ticking. The Star does something very important. It gives V a future beyond Night City. Panam talks about contacts. There's the suggestion that there may still be options out there, people who can help, places V hasn't looked, and solutions Night City never offered. Is it a guarantee cure? No, but it's not framed as hopeless either. So that's the key. Star doesn't end with V is dead, it ends with V still has a chance. And from a sequel perspective, that matters a lot. So if Orion wanted to bring V back, after the events of the Star, it wouldn't be hard to imagine a version of the story where the Elder Callers actually found someone, maybe something, or bought V more time. Once again, Cyberpunk refuses to give us a clean conclusion, instead it leaves us with possibility. Now let's move to the ending that's colder, more clinical, and in some ways more unsettling than the rest, the Devil. So this is the Arasaka ending where V trusts Hanako, pisses Johnny off, and sides with a corporation, and ends up in a place that feels less like salvation and more like surrender. The reason this ending matters for Orion isn't because it's hopeful, it matters because of what it proves. V's mind can be preserved. Now Arasaka doesn't simply treat V like a dying merc, they treat V like data, like a consciousness that can be studied, copied, stored, and potentially used later. Depending on the choices you make, V can either return to Earth in a fading body or agree to have their engram stored until a suitable solution exists. And that right there is one of the biggest reasons I don't think V's story is as closed as some people may assume. In Cyberpunk, death isn't always death. Identity, memory, personality, consciousness, these things can be digitized, transferred, altered, and preserved. The Devil may be one of the bleakest endings emotionally, but from a lore's perspective, it's one of the strongest arguments for V's survival in some form. Even if V's original body fails, Arasaka has already shown that the person themselves can continue to exist as an engram. That opens a massive door for Orion. Maybe V doesn't return as the same flesh and blood merc we played as in 2077. Maybe they return through tech, through stored consciousness, or through a version of cybernetic resurrection that only Cyberpunk's world can get away with. But once the Devil puts V's fate into the hands of the Arasaka, the idea that V is gone forever becomes harder to argue. And then we have the Tower, which you all know as the Phantom Liberty ending, and arguably the one that changes the conversation the most. Because unlike the other endings, the Tower gives us something extremely concrete: V survives. Now, not metaphorically, not as a digital construct, and not as a mystery left drifting in orbit. V physically lives, but at a cost, of course. So the relic is dealt with, but V loses the ability to live the life they once had. Their body is weakened, their cyberware future is gone, time has moved on, relationships have changed, and Night City no longer feels like home. So it's one of the most quietly devastating endings in the game because V survives, but survives as someone who has been stripped of almost everything that made them who they were. But if we're talking about where the Orion can bring V back, the Tower is impossible to ignore, because this ending removes the biggest obstacle every other ending struggles with. V is still here, alive, present, and canonically existing in the world after the story ends. Now, does that mean Orion will use Tower V as a definite version of the character? Not necessarily, but it does prove something important. CD Projekt Red was willing to create an ending where V survives the central crisis of Cyberpunk 2077. They didn't have to do that. They could have made Phantom Liberty another variation of bittersweet death. Instead, they gave V survival at a cost, and to me, that feels less like a closed grave and more like a deliberate complication. Something left on the table in case they ever wanted to revisit it. Then there's Don't Fear the Reaper, the secret ending. But what makes this one interesting is that despite being one of the most iconic paths in the game, it doesn't really create a completely separate final outcome for V. It changes how you get there. Storming Arasaka Tower alone, risking everything, but the final fate still falls back into endings we already know. So for the Orion theory, I don't think Reaper changes the bigger picture. What it does reinforce is the idea that Cyberpunk is obsessed with choice, sacrifice, and identity, but still refuses to nail V's fate to the floor in a way that makes a sequel impossible. Then there is the hardest ending to talk about, the path of least resistance. This is the rooftop suicide ending, and emotionally, it's probably the most devastating outcome in the game. So on the surface, this feels like the one ending that closes the book completely. But even here, Cyberpunk is strangely careful with what it shows. You hear the gunshot, you see the aftermath through the credits and the messages people leave behind. But once again, the game leans more into implication than direct finality. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying this ending secretly proves V is alive. I don't think that's the point. The point is broader than that. Across Cyberpunk's endings, the game repeatedly avoids giving V a single universal undeniable ending state that overrides everything else. Path of Least Resistance is tragic, intimate, and final in tone, but it's also just one possible outcome in a game built on fractured identity, engrams, and alternate fates. So for the Orion discussion, I don't think this ending is strong evidence that V returns, but I also don't think it destroys the possibility either, because Cyberpunk never treats it as the only truth. So could V return in Cyberpunk Orion? I think the answer is yes. not because we have proof, not because CD Projekt Red has confirmed anything, and not because every ending points neatly in the same direction, but because when you step back and look at Cyberpunk 2077 as a whole, one pattern becomes impossible to ignore. The game goes out of its way to avoid giving V one clean, definite fate. In the sun, V is alive and walking into another mission. In the star, V leaves Night City with a sliver of hope and the possibility of a cure. In the devil, V's consciousness can literally be preserved by Arasaka. In Temperance, V moves beyond the black wall rather than simply disappearing, and in the tower, V survives outright. Even the darker endings don't erase the larger pattern. Cyberpunk keeps V in a state of uncertainty, and uncertainty is exactly what a sequel can use. Orion may introduce a brand new protagonist, may move far beyond Night City, it may treat V as nothing more than a legend, a rumor, or a ghost in the machine. But if CD Projekt Red ever decides to bring V back, whether physically, digitally, or somewhere in between, I don't think it would break Cyberpunk 2077 at all. I think the game has been quietly leaving that possibility open from the very beginning. And honestly, in a world of engrams, AI corporate resurrection, and minds that can outlive bodies, V coming back might be one of the most cyberpunk things possible. So, do you think V will return? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you liked this video, hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.